Iraq, 1981. Heavy combat is taking place in Iraqi territory. American soldier Miles Willis is badly injured and loses consciousness. Suddenly, a bright flash appears above the man. Miles opens his eyes and looks around. He is in a small concrete room with no windows or doors. The man tries to get up, but the injury proves to be too serious. He falls to the ground and leans against the wall to tend to the wound. Miles covers the wound and pulls a radio from his backpack to contact the base. Just then, the man notices an abandoned sign on the wall. The soldier begins to suspect that he has been captured. He addresses the hostiles in various languages,
Assalamu alaikum,
but receives no response. Only another word is added to the writing on the wall, and it reads, "Abandon all." Another inscription on the floor urges the prisoner to save his soul, but to Miles, it all seems like some kind of prank or an attempt to drive him crazy. Suddenly, the temperature in the room begins to rise. The hostage throws off his clothes, but it's not enough. It gets so hot that drops of water boil on the ground. Maddened by the heat, Miles grabs the gun and pulls the trigger. But the walls turn out to be very strong. The bullets ricochet and the man passes out from the unbearable heat. Finally, Miles comes to his senses and reaches for his water bottle. But at that moment, something strange happens. The room begins to spin and the prisoner, along with his belongings, hits the stone walls. When everything stops, Miles notices that the writing is now on the other side. The man also senses other changes that are not visible to the naked eye. The soldier's belongings end up on the ceiling, and he notices the last of his water supplies spilling out of the bottle. The man has another breakdown and hopes it is just a normal nightmare. Miles picks up the radio again and tries to contact the base. At one point, he hears the voice of a contact, but he is unable to establish a signal and talk. The man decides to dictate his satellite phone number, but suddenly, the phone starts ringing. The hostage tries to jump in, but the injury makes it too difficult. He can't knock down the phone with his boot either. The boot sticks to the ceiling next to the satellite phone. Suddenly, the walls of the cube are covered in frost and Miles begins to freeze. The man faints from the cold, but after a few hours, the frost disappears and Miles regains consciousness. Above his head, the cell phone rings again, but the soldier doesn't try to reach for it. He makes an obscene gesture and turns away. The cube starts spinning again and Miles flies around the room, dodging blows. But this time, the guy manages to get back on his feet and does his best to grab a satellite phone. The soldier succeeds. The phone stays in his hands, but stops ringing. Miles crawls to his shoes and helmet and pulls out the picture of his daughter that he always carries with him. He also tries to satisfy his hunger with chewing gum and puts on a helmet so the next centrifuge won't hurt him too much. Miles scrolls through the call log to call back, but the number doesn't appear. Finally, he hears a dial tone, and after a few seconds, a female voice answers him. The woman on the other end of the line is also confused. She starts screaming and demands that Miles introduce himself and explain where she is. Miles gives his name and asks the woman to tell him why he is locked in this room. But the caller cannot answer this question. She's described as being in the same concrete room. The two describe the phenomena in their room to each other, and Miles realizes that they are seeing the same thing. At some point, they even begin to suspect each other of being set up, but the soldier asks the woman to calm down and talk things over. From the conversation, Miles begins to suspect that his caller is a journalist. He analyzes her speech and admits that she does not sound like a military person. Miles tells her to calm down and convinces her that there is only one way out. They have to stick together. The soldier examines the walls, hoping to find a passage to a neighboring cell, but the pain from the wound stops him. The woman begins to describe the highway she was on, and she accidentally mentions Miles's military background. The man begins to suspect something. He did not tell the woman that he was in the army. The stranger manages to escape from the unpleasant conversation. She assures the man that she has just assumed. Her name is Damsey, and she asks Miles to remember his words about trusting each other. The conversation is interrupted. First, Damsey starts screaming, and a second later, a token is placed around Miles's neck, and an unseen force pulls him off the ground. The strange light seems to stretch the soldier, and he screams in pain, but soon it ends and the hostage falls to the ground. The man has no time to recover, and the cube starts spinning again. But that is not the worst of it. Miles sees the walls shift and the room get smaller. The soldier tries to hold the press, but falls and loses consciousness from the impact. Miles has a panic attack, but he manages to answer the phone, and Damsey calms his neighbor down. The woman's voice brings the soldier to his senses, and he hears his caller fixing her shoulder. Damsey offers to solve the puzzle before the room gets any smaller. She asks Miles to dictate the writings in his cell, and he finds a new quote written in Latin. The couple goes back to discussing the last location. When Damsey calls out the highway numbers, Miles finally loses comprehension. According to the woman, she was in Massachusetts, and it is unclear how she ended up in Iraq now. Miles suspects the woman is lying. His satellite phone is set to a closed network, work, and she can't be in America. The woman recalls that she also saw a bright flash just before she lost consciousness. The man hopes that Damsey is nearby and begins to scream,
"Damsey, can you hear me?"
But the woman can't hear his voice through the walls, and the hostages lose hope of reaching each other. Miles becomes suspicious again. He asks how Damsey got his number, and the woman assures him that it was written on the ceiling. This becomes a new mystery. The man's number is written on his cell, and there's no way Damsey could have seen it. While talking to the woman, the soldier notices an incoming call on the other line. He doesn't tell Damsey and pretends to have lost the signal. Miles hears an unfamiliar accented voice. The caller says strange things about the equation, and that all the captives will end their lives here. The soldier returns to his conversation with Damsey. He doesn't tell her about the conversation with the stranger, but asks her to look closely at the walls and find the equation. The woman realizes that Miles is hiding something from her. She asks him leading questions, trying to find out what the soldier was up to just before that day. Miles changes the subject and finds out that Damsey works as a high school algebra teacher. He also learns that the woman has a fiancé who also served in the US Army. The soldier also talks about his wife. He admits that they don't have the best relationship, but he misses her. In order to avoid talking about sad things, Miles suggests that they talk about the signs on the walls again. It turns out that both hostages see the same signs, as if they were next to each other. The soldier is sure that the two rooms are similar, but the woman suspects it's something else. She asks him the year and finds out that they are in different times. Miles in 1991 and Damsey in 2020. Damsey asks the soldier if he knows what a smartphone, social media, and selfies are, but it all sounds like a foreign language to Miles. Something strange starts happening in the room again. Lights are flashing and an ultrasound is emitted, stunning the captives. Miles tries to keep his balance, but the cube habitually knocks him to the ground and he falls unconscious. Damsey has to calm the soldier down and remind him that they are in the same room at different times. To test this, the woman asks her buddy to write something on the wall. The woman's plan works. She sees the X that the soldier scribbled with a knife. In response, she circles her hand and the couple realizes that this is how they can stay in touch. Captives realize that there could be thousands of people in the room with them from different times, but it remains unclear how they managed to call each other on a closed line. Damsey tries to find an explanation for everything that happens to them. She uses her knowledge of mathematics and theories, but Miles sees the answer in something else. The soldier is sure that some mysterious forces are testing his body. They heat, freeze, shake, and stun to see how much the average human body can withstand. The man falls to the ground and asks Damsey to tell him about the future. He wonders if there are flying cars, and if man has been able to fly to other planets. The woman sadly says that it is all a fantasy for now. Nothing has changed in the Middle East either, and thousands of soldiers remain on the sandy ground forever. Weakness takes its toll, and Miles begins to fall asleep. Miles passes out for a few seconds, but Damsey manages to wake him up. The woman cries and begs her buddy not to leave her so they can get out. Miles returns to the task at hand. He notices Arabic mathematical symbols on the floor and begins to decipher them using a dictionary. Damsey recognizes a famous equation by a mathematician that sounds like the fourth-dimensional equation. Couple doesn't have time to solve the equation because someone crosses it out. Miles then tries to remember the symbols and write them on his hand to solve the puzzle. Damsey asks Miles questions. She wants to know if the guy ever hurt anyone, but Miles doesn't like this conversation. He snaps at the girl, saying that civilians don't understand what goes on in the military. Miles remembers his father abusing his mother years ago. The boy tried to protect the woman, but he was too small and became a victim of the tyrant himself. The soldier tells Damsey to hurry. The room is about to get narrower, and if she doesn't solve the equation, they won't be able to escape. But an invisible force doesn't give the woman a chance. The hostages are pulled to the ground by a powerful gravitational force. The gravity proves to be so strong that it pulls the bullet out of Miles's body. The man is in pain and falls to the floor, wishing it would all be over soon. It's time for the centrifuge. The cube throws the prisoner and the walls continue to move. But this time, the lights in the room begin to flicker. The soldier tries to call Damsey back, but instead of the woman's voice, he hears the voice of a stranger with a foreign accent. The caller repeats the word victim and says that they must not see and they must not find out. Miles interrupts the call rather than listen to the whining of a stranger who wants to give up and sacrifice himself. He manages to get Damsey on the phone, but the signal is too weak and all the words are lost. The woman admits that she broke her arm in the centrifuge. Miles convinces her to finish the equation, but the woman says she wants to give up and that they have no chance of escaping. The soldier begins to suspect that Damsey and the guy with the accent are the same. It turns out to be true. The girl admits that she knows the enemy and that there is no point in resisting them. According to the traitor, they are surrounded by a higher life form for which the prisoners are test subjects. Damsey asks his buddy not to show his abilities to the invaders. He has to surrender so the aliens won't see him as a real threat and leave humanity alone. That's why she refuses to solve the equation. The woman doesn't want anyone to know her level of intelligence. Miles doesn't support Damsey, assuring her that they can solve the equation and get out. But at the same time, a thought occurs to the couple. Only the one who solves the puzzle faster will be able to escape. The lights in the room go out again. In the darkness, Miles begins to panic. He sees horrible scenes from the past, hears his mother's screams and the sound of gunshots. Then the man decides to give up. He raises the barrel to his chin and addresses his father, who has not allowed him to live in peace for 30 years. He is trying to understand why his father was cruel to him and to his mother. Miles doesn't have the guts to pull the trigger. He turns on his phone and dials Damsey's number. The woman also cries and confesses that her visions included her fiancé, who also happens to be violent. But Miles assures his friend that this is another test that has proven to be the most difficult. Damsey admits to the soldier that her boyfriend often leaves bruises on her body. The day before, she tried to get away from him, but her car went off the road and she ended up in this room. Damsey's mood changes. She begins to accuse Miles of saying that all men are the same and can't be trusted. The woman hangs up and is replaced by a stranger with an accent. He again demands that the captives stop fighting and prove to the aliens that there is no threat. The cube shrinks and the soldier finds himself in a small box. He hopes that Damsey will solve the equation soon and that it will all be over. The man manages to reach his phone and answers. He asks the woman to solve the equation so that she can finally be free. Miles also asks Damsey to find his wife and daughter and give them his last words. Miles helps Damsey solve the equation. The woman puts in the required numbers and the signal sounds. The cube begins to shrink again, and the soldier realizes he's missed something. Together, the captives try to find the answer, and they succeed. They shout out the solution and begin to fight the stone cube. Suddenly, the walls disappear and they see each other and other people around them, but after a moment, everything turns into a bright light and the people disappear. The soldier opens his eyes and goes in search of his base. Strange planes fly over his head, and he realizes that the whole world now has a new common enemy.